And to Ronstadt morning on the basketball show. That'll be the day. Best voice of the 70s. And, boy, love this music. Ryan, you're spinning it like a DJ.
I'm just doing as I'm told here, so.
Welcome to the big show this morning. Speaking of the big show, it just got bigger as we welcome in our next guest, Doug McLean, play-by-play voice of the Edmonton Stingers, Golden Bears, Pandas, Fishu basketball, 3x3, you name it. He broadcasts it. Doug, good morning.
Hello, Paul. How are you doing?
Doing great. Glad to have you with us today as we are on the eve of the 7th season. Can you believe it, Doug? 7 years of the Canadian Elite Basketball League. It's pretty darn exciting, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I know, and it's true. I mean, 7 years, it seems like it's kind of flown by, but it's, I think, a testament to where the game is at in Canada, and I think it continues to grow with, obviously they've added teams to the league. This season will be the longest they've ever had with 24 games now. So, yeah, it's great, and it's nice to have the Stingers back and the league back up and going.
Absolutely is. So tomorrow the tip-off is 4 o'clock against the rivals to the south. I'll be real kind here, Doug. The rivals to the south, the Calgary Surge. And, the history of the rivalry hasn't been overly kind, has it, to the Stingers?
No, it hasn't. I mean, Stingers have had some success, especially on the road against Calgary, but it's been, it's maybe tipped a little bit in favor of the Surge, and I know for Edmonton, they're looking to get off to a good start tomorrow, and no better way than to do it against any team coming from Calgary, and I think for the Stingers, it'll be trying to set the tone tomorrow, not just for this rivalry, but I think for how they want their season to go.
So the other night, Doug, you and I were able to go over to Strathcona High School and watch the Stingers practice, have a chance to meet some of the players. I was only able to stay for about half an hour. What were your impressions? What were your first impressions of this team that Coach and GM Jordan Baker, Associate GM Steve Sir have put together for this year?
Yeah, the number one thing I think is they're going to be, just from watching practice, and again, you got to take that with a grain of salt. They've been together for just a few days, but I think they're a more athletic team. I think they're going to be able to play the style that Jordan Baker wants to play maybe a little more easily than the team we saw last year. I think they're going to be able to get up and down the floor. They're going to be a defense first, focus on how they play in their own defensive half court, and I think they've got longer players, more athletic players, and that's not to discredit who they had last year, but I just think they're going to be able to play the tempo that they want to play. And I thought at times last year they were able to play that style defensively, but they had a tougher time doing it at the offensive end. And I think they're going to be able to do that a little more effectively offensively, get out in transition. I'm still not sure how great an offensive team they're going to be. I mean, time will tell. But I think certainly their ability to get out in transition, and I think how they'll be able to play defensively will be at a higher athletic level than maybe we saw through stretches last year.
One of the things that the CEBL has to deal with, that's just a reality, given the timing of the season, is that very rarely do all teams start with their full roster for players that they have that they've actually signed. There are some key pieces that aren't here yet because their seasons overseas are ongoing, but you have to play with the hand that you're dealt with. Number one, it's next man up. Number two, always that way in sport. But I think it's a really tight, short training camp. But these are basketball players. These are pros. These are men. These are adults. What we've seen in the past, Doug, I think I'd be interested in your commentary on this, but I think what we're used to is not seeing a finished product out of the gate, but we are used to seeing a very competitive first game, aren't we?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, and your point is bang on. I think sometimes instinct almost takes over. And I mean, you played pro basketball, like you'll have a far better sense of this than I would, but I think in those early days, you're trying to get systems in, you're trying to get some level of structure to what you want your team to play. But I mean, if we had truth serum for Jordan Baker, I think he'd tell you that, look, at some point early in a season, just the sheer experience of these individuals as players, having played at high-level university in Canada or high-level college in the U.S. or some pro experience they've had. It's just instinct that takes over, and then you start to see the system piece come into play over the course of time. And the Stingers have a bit of an advantage. I think it's been their strength from really day one 7 years ago. It is really about some level of continuity that they bring. And there's 4 players that are going to be back this year, which I think will help them. But it does take some time, and we're going to see which team is more prepared tomorrow afternoon, and the one that maybe has enough structure in their game that they can lean on. But again, who's bringing the best athletes to the table that can just go? And oftentimes, we found early in CEBL seasons, that's often what ends up happening.
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum that the CEBL faces. I think you phrased that very well, Doug. And I think the Stingers have tried to address it by the continuity that you just described. I mean, we have a coaching staff made up of local coaches. They're not bringing G League coaches in, and you can make an argument either way, however you want to do that. But head coach now, Jordan Baker, was an all CEBL player. Heck, when you see Jordan coaching, he could still be out there playing very well for the Stingers, but he's chosen to go the coaching route and brings that experience for the league, not just his experience as an elite player, but for the league and how the league has to run. But you try to, there's always a lot of talk about building culture on a team. And one of the challenges for the CEBL is it's real hard to do that in a very, very short, tight season, especially with a short training camp. But the Stingers have, I think, prized that continuity and culture and made that a center point of building their team around that by bringing back a Nick Hornsby again, who is such a leader, and trying to find local players to integrate into the lineup. So that is definitely a strength of this organization, isn't it, Doug?
100%. And you took the words right out of my mouth in regards to Nick Hornsby. I think him being back is huge because, he's a player that's not going to knock your socks off with his offensive ability. He's not going to, control the paint defensively. He's not the fastest guy on the floor, but man, every single team anywhere in the world is going to want Nick Hornsby on their roster because he's a guy that does all of those things well. When you need some offense, he can probably provide it. When you need a big stop, he can do that. But you're right, he's a leader, and I think he's a guy that can bring in some level of continuity to what this roster needs. And I'll point to another player, and this was pointed out to us by some of the coaching staff the other day when we were at practice, but Hey Donald, who's a player who they drafted last year, played a little bit for them, not a lot. I think he got into 9 games a year ago for the Stingers. But if you had just dropped into practice the other day and didn't know anything different or anything about this team, he would have stood out not just because of his play on the floor, but I think because of just how he was trying to lead on the floor. And he's a guy that still actually has a year of eligibility left at Laurier in Ontario. But he's a guy that I think they can lean on too because he knows the systems a little bit, and he just looked like a leader on the floor. And with Elijah Miller not yet back as their starting point guard, Donald's probably going to get some significant floor time. But again, another layer of continuity that they bring in. And so it's not you're not bringing back 8 or 9 guys. They're bringing back ultimately 4 that were with the team a year ago. But again, just that little bit can make a difference. Calgary only has 2. And we'll see tomorrow with how much of a difference that makes. But, yeah, Hornsby, Donald, Aaron Rooms, I think will all make a difference in terms of just having had experience in the city, experience with the coaching staff, and we'll see how much that pays dividends for them starting tomorrow.
I'm talking with Doug McLean, the play-by-play voice of the Edmonton Stingers here on the Basketball Show on Sports 1440. Let's talk about some of the new players. You laid the foundation really well, Doug, with Nick and the other players that are coming back. But let's talk about some of the players that the Stingers are going to roll out tomorrow. One player that stands out to me, and having had a chance to talk with him the other day, Scotty Lindsay, has a lot of CEBL experience, has had a successful career as well in the G League and overseas too. I mean, he's a player. Back in 2022, he averaged almost 20 points a game for the Saskatchewan Rattlers. Last year, he averaged 13.5 points per game for a very good Winnipeg Sea Bears game. What do you think the impact of, speaking of scoring that I think you correctly laid out, how important is it to have someone not just with international experience, not just with G League and NCAA experience, but with actual CEBL experience, because the CEBL is a very unique basketball game?
Yep. No, I think you're right. I think he's a very important component to where this team is going to go, because one of the challenges that I think they had last year is they did have at times a tough time scoring, didn't necessarily have that go-to player that you could lean on. They'd hope that would be Davion Warren. They'd hope that would be Jacob Evans. It never really materialized for them to the degree that they probably wanted. Brody Clark was probably one of their more consistent scorers. He's decided to move on from his basketball career. So I think a player like Lindsay, who, as you mentioned, Paul, has good CEBL experience, I think so he'll understand maybe to a greater degree those early season challenges that can exist with trying to build some level of continuity. And you combine that with the fact that he'll be playing with a Devontae Bandu, who's a Mississauga native, played at Baylor, was out of that Baylor program the year before they won their NCAA title, but he's, again, got good experience at high levels, played on that Saskatchewan team with Lindsay back in 2022, actually led them in scoring that year, did Bandu with 17 and a half. So again, they've got, in 21, he led them with 17 and a half. So they've got players who have some familiarity with each other, but also some familiarity with the league. And Bandu's numbers dropped a little bit last year in Montreal, just at 8 a game, but I think they've got some guys there that can provide a level of scoring that maybe they didn't have last year. Cameron McGriff, another player who we'll see, he's a little bit banged up this week. We'll see if he plays for them tomorrow, but he's got some NBA experience, having spent 3 games with the Portland Trailblazers back in 2022. Again, some G League experience. So some guys that have pedigree that we'll see if they can answer that key question that I'm always curious about. You're 10 seconds left, you're down by 1, where's the ball going? And I always worry about teams that don't have an answer to that question. So if they can answer that question with one of those 3 or somebody else, then I think they'll be in a better spot offensively than maybe they were a year ago.
I agree with you, Doug. And one of the key areas, along with scoring, that I'm most interested in, because I think the Stingers really struggled with this last year at some time. And you mentioned a couple of players, so I'm not going to go into specifics, but I think in a general overall tone, there were players that were being looked to really be not just highly productive, but leaders on the court in terms of effort that sometimes just frankly wasn't there. What struck me the other night, and of course, this is the honeymoon phase. Everybody's together. Everybody's trying to win favor with the coach, as all teams are. That's not a knock on anybody. But it's if this team will go out and have a level of compete for 40 minutes with the athleticism they brought in, some of the experience that you've described, that I think will set the tone not just for the team to start bonding and start coming together more quickly, but also to bond with the fans as well, because we all know fans love teams that work hard from start to finish.
Yeah, and especially in this city, I think you look at any of the franchises here, I think that's when, I think that's what people here tend to admire. And so I agree with you. And then, you already mentioned it earlier, but look at their head coach. I mean, he's the guy that, whether you're going back to his Alberta Golden Bear days or his pro days here with the Stingers, Jordan Baker was almost always the hardest working player on the floor. I mean, the talent that he brought was a huge bonus to that, obviously, but he was the hardest working player, and that's what he wants this team to be. And I agree with you. I think just watching the other day, and again, it's practice. You take it with a grain of salt because they're trying to do lots of things in a short period of time. But I thought the way they were moving up and down the floor, I thought the way they were competing at the defensive end, I thought the way they were communicating even at the defensive end, I think are signs that maybe this team is a little bit more in the mold of what Baker wants. And again, the proof will be over the next few weeks if you start to see that. But I think it's a team that isn't necessarily going to have a star or two, and you can argue if that's good or bad. But I think it's going to be a team that they can roll out 8, 9, 10 players deep, and you're going to see a compete level that's pretty consistent. And I think that's really what they want to get to. And it looks like, again, early days, it looks like that's the kind of team that they brought together, even with some of their younger guys. I mean, you look at some of their U Sports players that they've drafted and brought in, be that Tay Donald, be that, Lee Tong, who's a player that can jump out of the gym. He comes here from playing at Cape Breton. Jalen Shirley at the point guard spot, coming from UBC Okanagan. So and Aaron Rooms, who they bring back, who's the, Ontario University Player of the Year. I think they might even be able to lean on some of those guys for that compete level and that athleticism. So it's going to be an interesting mix, I think, in terms of the kind of players they've brought in. But that compete, I 100% agree with you. I think if we see that early, I think that's a really good sign for where this team can go.
One player, Doug, that I'm really rooting for is Harry Ainley's Sabri Phillips. Sabri, I've known since he was literally a little kid. Growing up, outstanding player in junior high school, in high school at Harry Ainley. Went south pursuing his dream, but had a couple of serious, and I mean serious, injuries that really, really thwarted his ability to, I think, gain the kind of foothold in a particular program in Division I. He played junior college and Division I at a couple of different schools, but Sabri is on the roster as well. And of course, you're always rooting for the hometown guys, but Sabri in particular, to me, I have a real soft spot in my heart for Sabri Phillip, that I hope this will be a springboard for him to get a taste of professional basketball so that he can continue, now that he's healthy, playing as long as his body will allow him.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. And I mean, a guy who, again, you look at the numbers. He played at Stony Brook last year in the NCAA, didn't play a ton, didn't put up big numbers. And they're looking at him, I think, this year to be a real defensive stopper, a guy that they can put on the floor who, when, you need a big stopper, maybe you need a bit of a momentum shift, he's a guy that can step in. And I think, often younger players that are coming, whether it's coming, early days at the college or university level or pro, I think when you wrap a really specific role for them, especially when you look at Philip's situation, as you mentioned, with the injuries and just trying to get his career back on track, I think if you can sort of give a really specific role to a guy, I think that can help a ton. And, so again, he might not be looked at as a guy that's going to put up big numbers for you, but there's some familiarity with him. With their assistant coach is George Hoyt. He was his coach at Harry Ainley. So there's there will be a bit of familiarity obviously there. And yeah, I'm with you. If he can come in and establish himself a little bit, even if he's not putting up big numbers, but he's going to play some minutes for them, I think that's huge, not just for this team, but I think, again, another reflection of where basketball in this community has come from and is going. And like you said, hopefully it can be a springboard for him for a good stay with the Stingers over the long haul and maybe to other pro opportunities in the winter season.
Absolutely. So, Doug, tomorrow you and I, scary as this seems, are going to be behind the microphones as we tip off the season at 4:00 over at Hall D. Now, I apologize for this. Is it the Hive again, or are we still calling it Hall D? Do you know if it's I've heard both.
Yeah, I know. It's a good question. You should probably get I'll see if I can get an answer before we go on the air tomorrow, because you're right. It's changed a few times in the last couple of years, so we should probably get a bit of clarity around that one. But yeah, looking forward to it. I think it's again, looks to be a fun Stingers team that they've put together. And Calgary, again, you've got Ruggsy Miller-Moore, another really solid player in the league, was a Canadian All-Star a year ago. So it's going to be a tough matchup for the Stingers, but I think a great way to start the year, and I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. To start out with your in-province rival is the best way to go. And for those of you who don't have tickets, go to the Stinger website. You can pick your tickets up. I know it's close to being sold out. Hopefully it's a raucous, sold-out crowd in the midst of this raucous hockey environment and world we're living in. Doug McLean, thank you so much for joining me this morning, and really looking forward to calling the game with you tomorrow. Have a great Saturday.
You too, Paul. Always happy to join you and look forward to seeing you in the Collins Stingers tomorrow.
Doug McLean joining me today. We'll be calling the play-by-play of the Edmonton Stingers versus the Calgary Surge tomorrow, 4 p.m. over in Hall D at the Expo Center. We're going to take a break right now, and then it's closing time with Ryan and Paul here on your Sports Leader, Sports 1440.